Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be.
Happy Mother's Day, everyone. Welcome to Recover You. Today, we're going to be talking about self-confidence and self-worth. Kylene?
It's Mother's Day today, but when they're listening, it'll be 3 days after Mother's Day. So we hope you had a happy Mother's Day weekend. Welcome, Patrick. He just woke up from a nap.
Yeah, I'm a little groggy right now. Yeah, it's I deserved a nap on Mother's Day.
You worked hard for breakfast this morning. So
I did. Yeah, and I ran. It was fun.
Yeah, so today we're going to be discussing the difference between self-worth and self-confidence. You know, as Patrick and I have navigated our years of recovery and trying to reconcile a relationship and doing the deep internal work and self-reflection and personal growth, there have just been a lot of things that have sort of come to my mind, come to our realization in new ways. And we talk about how, that's part of the benefit of recovery. We none of us would have asked that we go through the catalyst that started this journey, but then the journey itself does bring so many valuable insights. And one of the things was that we were having a conversation one day and I had this realization. I was like, I think there's like a big difference between self-worth and self-confidence. And that's not something I don't know if I've ever really heard anybody really talk about that, but I was realizing it because it manifested itself in the significant differences between myself and Patrick. And it also really impacted and influenced how we personally navigated recovery. So we thought that maybe we would talk about that a little bit today, because again, all of these things that we bring up in the episodes, probably 90% of it is stuff we've had personal experience with, or it's stuff that either you're going through or we hope that it will help you think through something that you're going through. And this is one of those things I think it can bring a little bit of a deeper awareness and self-understanding about how we think about things and how we view the world. And I definitely think there's a significant difference between the two. And the primary difference is that one has to do with identity and the other doesn't. So let's maybe jump into the definitions really quickly. And again, these are my definitions because this is kind of my understanding, awareness, and takeaways from all of this. So I would define self-worth as a deep core belief that you are valuable and worthy. You believe you should be treated with dignity and you don't think others are more or less valuable than you are. So basically, you're human, you believe that yourself and others have intrinsic value, that's all equal. And it's not, when you know that you are someone that is worthy and valuable and you have this intrinsic level of self-worth, that plays into the identity because that is at a core level who you know yourself to be. And that is separate from, if you make a mistake, if you struggle with these different patterns or different parts of your life in any way. And we'll kind of break some of this down into more practical things in a minute. But I think at its core, I would say self-worth has to do with like your belief, your identity as a human being, and your deep, deep, deep belief that you have value and worth. Self-confidence would be a little bit different. It would be more of a feeling, a sense of being comfortable and a feeling of safety interacting with and relating to other people. So you're in a group, you feel really confident, you feel really safe being in a group of people. It's a natural thing for you to be able to have positive interactions with those people, and you're not really worrying too much about what they think about you or their perception about you or their interpretation of you. You're not necessarily like I will often go into a situation with a person or a group of people, have a great time, interact with the conversation, then leave and then analyze everything and go, did I say something wrong? Or how are they interpreting it? Right. So there's a little bit of that. So if you have a lot of self-confidence, you're generally probably not going to have that follow-up thought when you leave. You're going to go in, you're going to interact, you're not going to worry about it too much, and then you're going to leave and everything's going to be fine.
I actually think, as you're talking, I think self-confidence could be situational. So,
Sure.
So for example, I was confident when I flew. I had self-confidence in my ability to be a pilot, but I may not have had as much self-confidence when it came to, I'm just using the Army, briefing the general or putting together some sort of mission plan. I didn't have as much confidence there.
Sure.
Whereas worth is an all-encompassing thing. It it overshadows everything that you're doing. Whereas self-confidence, you can individual areas of self-confidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So the reason this sort of came up, and I can't remember when it came up for you and me. It was a while ago, but when we were thinking about this and talking about our this idea, I was thinking, I really have a lot of self-worth. Like, I believe that I am valuable and that I am worthy of, respect and dignity and that sort of thing. And so that really impacts the way I live my life. It certainly impacted the way I navigated recovery and and how I was able to make certain decisions through recovery. And I struggle with self-confidence quite often, whereas, and just putting them into sort of compact boxes. Obviously, there's nuance. Like, to your point, you can have, it may come and go depending on the situation, but being very black and white about it, we discovered, had very low self-worth, but high self-confidence. So we were kind of opposite, actually. Right. And so that's why it sort of resonated. I was like, but how can you're navigating this world and this addiction where your sense of self-worth and value was so low. You had all these really negative beliefs about yourself, about you as a human being. You're on an identity core belief level, but then you go and everybody likes you and you get along with everybody and you have so much self-confidence. You don't ruminate, you don't overthink about, how people interpret things that you said at a party or, any of that. And I was like, oh my gosh, you have so much self-confidence. And to the world, they could interpret that so easily as self-worth. But the reality of what you were dealing with is the opposite. You actually really struggled with your value.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was easy for me to be in a friendship situation. It's easy for me to walk into a room. Oddly enough, in some weird way, I didn't care about what people thought. But there was this, if you look at the root of the behavior, there was a lot of, I guess, hurt through that. And even, like Jay Stringer would say, like, my habit of acting out was decoupled from other people's ability to reject me or whatever that is, the nature of what my acting out pattern was. So it was interesting because, like, I don't, why did that, how could I not care what people think on almost 99% of everything, right? Like, I don't, if somebody's like, well, I don't really like Patrick, I'm like, I don't care.
Well, I think what we're talking about is self-confidence is a little bit more about what other people think. Self-worth is a little bit more about how we view ourselves.
Yeah. So it was just, it for the longest time, when I started this journey, I didn't think I had a self-worth problem. You know what I mean? Like right at the point of discovery. But then as I started to move through, trying to understand the root of why I was there, the whole pattern of being unlovable and not, I developed this core belief at a very young age that I had to solve my own problems, that nobody was going to help me solve. I couldn't rely on anybody. And what's interesting is, like, everything that kind of happened in my life, I looked through that lens. I viewed everything that happened to me through that lens up until discovery, when I started to kind of shift that actually, no, I actually do need, and I can take help. And as people start to learn more and more about me, that not only will they, have grace on me like you did, but they'll also, help me through this because they believe I'm a person of worth. I don't need to go away. And you and I talked a little bit about that last night. when we were sitting outside, this whole notion of me deeply thinking that it would be better off for you just to be without me. That wasn't, I think it was, I remember when I used to think that, it was like, well, she just needs to be with somebody else who hasn't hurt her. Right. And there was a practicality in the way that I viewed that I was like, well, I just think that she's going to realize that there's just better people out there for her. Yet you actually saw through that and were like, no, actually, I don't want to be with anybody else. I want to be with you, but a better version of you. You know what I mean? I know all this stuff about you. So like, whereas you believed in me, I didn't believe in me. Mm-hmm. And so that was probably the one aspect from my own self-worth that it took me the longest time to get past.
Yeah. Yeah. And then alternatively, I don't struggle with that as much. I don't want it to come off as conceited in any way, because I do struggle often with self-confidence in how people perceive me and getting along with people and wanting to be kind and how I come across and how I relate to people. I want to be somebody that connects with them and is empathetic and all this kind of stuff, right? So I like overthink things a lot and it makes me a little insecure sometimes. But in terms of value, like I don't really struggle with that. I know who I am. I know what I want. I know what I deserve. And I really kind of approached recovery like that a lot in terms of not wanting to settle for anything less than that. I was like, well, this is clear in my mind, Right, yeah. And not that there's so many layers that, not that it wasn't still a struggle or, whatever, but yeah, I think it offered some clarity for me. So when I'm thinking about how this shows up for others navigating, if a betrayed partner really struggles with self-worth, they're going to have that identity level of like not feeling valuable enough. Then what may be difficult for a betrayed partner is being able to set really strong boundaries and communicate and use their voice, because if they struggle with an internal identity that they're not valuable enough, then they may that may subconsciously manifest as, oh, I kind of don't believe on some level that I'm worth the work it takes for my partner to respect those boundaries. Mm-hmm. And I do, that's a tricky thing, because there's so many other little pieces in there, and it manifests as people pleasing, right? Well, I don't want to parent my partner. I don't want to push them too hard. There's fears in there of, if I come across too confident or too strong or too powerful, or to throw in the adjective that resonates with you, if I come across as blank, then they're not going to like me anymore, or they're going to leave me, or if I do X, Y, Z, they're going to relapse. And now the betrayed partner is walking on eggshells. And I think a lot of those actually can stem from the identity not being strong enough in their value and their worth as a human being. You are worth the work. You're absolutely worth the work that it takes to have a healthy relationship, and to be living in a relationship where there's not someone or something actively hurting you regularly. Yeah,
you said early on after discovery, like, this is what it takes to be in relationship with me. And I remember thinking, and it was like, don't relapse, and, this stuff, and, and all these different things. And I remember kind of being like, it was almost like a foreign concept to me. I'm like, be in relationship with you. Like, what? You know what I mean? Like, and so, but it was important because it did demonstrate a lot of your self-worth. You were like, hey, I'm not a person that's going to put up with these kinds of behaviors happening to me. Mm-hmm. And so, in my addict brain, as I worked through it, it was actually it helped give me clarity as to what my patterns of behavior should be. And so, I had some internal motivation as well, but, there was certainly, that was very helpful, for you to hear you say that this is what it takes to be in relationship with me.
So for the addict who may struggle with self-worth, this can show up in self-sabotage patterns. Well, and I would say for all of us, it can, any human.
Right.
If self-worth being something that we have at a core identity core belief level, if it's a negative belief, if it's a negative self-worth, if we don't believe that we're valuable to ask for these things, to set boundaries, to, et cetera, then it can lead into any sort of negative patterning. So particularly with an addict, if they struggle with an identity of low self-worth, they can continue to self-sabotage with relapsing as an example, or other unhealthy patterns. Maybe it's negative communication patterns with their partner because they don't believe that they're really worthy of love. And so they are going to then live into that behavior, and they're going to sort of fall into the familiar patterns of the way they talk to their partner, which I don't want to kind of loop. I hope this isn't confusing, but basically, let's say we get into a pattern of like anger, defensive,ness, denial, gaslight, whatever it is. And if you really believe that you're not really worthy of love, then there's a part of you, a piece of you that can continue in this pattern, even if you know it's not nice or unhealthy, or relapsing as an example. Your conscious part of you doesn't really want to be doing this thing anymore. But if you don't believe you're worthy of what it takes to be healthy, and you don't think you're capable of the outcome, and you have this identity of, well, I'm just a horrible human and I'm not actually valuable at all, you will continue to live into the patterns that prove that to be true. And so that can show up, with addict behavior itself, or it can show up in communication with your partner and how you perpetuate and continue those patterns as well.
Yeah, I think the brain likes familiarity, and so even on the negative side, that's why addictions come about. So to your point, if you're like I do not believe in my self-worth, so I'm going to create the conditions that once again prove my lack of self-worth.
Right. And nobody's going to say that out loud. Nobody knows that they're doing that, right? In fact, it's the opposite. They find themselves stuck in these patterns and they go, I know better than this. Yeah, why am I doing this again? Yeah. Why do I get defensive when I know that my partner is right? Why do I have to defend myself when I know that I'm the one that hurt my partner? Why do I have to, X, Y, Z, right? And, for a betrayed partner too, let's say they've, often I'll see, like we've talked about this, like the over empathy side with the lack of boundaries, or people pleasing is a really common one. And that can, people pleasing can come from probably both, right? Lack of self-confidence or lack of self-worth. It could fall into either category. But people pleasing definitely is, one of those patterns. Why do I keep doing this? Yeah. Well, because we haven't addressed the real reason that your brain needs, essentially wants and desires to smooth out the outcome of this situation, to predict and to manage the outcome of this situation, to be able to predetermine what the outcome of this conversation or this relationship is going to be. And so if we need to be able to predict the future, then we're probably going to people please a lot, or fall into these stepping over our own boundaries or doing these own things, because we will ultimately live into what we most deeply believe. And if we believe that that's more important than our own needs, if managing a situation and avoiding conflict is more important than my voice being heard, if that's a deep enough belief, then I will live into that every single time.
Well, I also think that there are statements that are made that are just kind of general, how you should behave, that can increase the level of lack of self-worth. So for example, it'll be like, well, you should always forgive people, or, which is true, you should forgive people, and or you should always find a way to treat people with as much kindness. And so somebody who has maybe low self-worth will go, well, that just means that I have to
try harder.
I have to try harder, or I have to take this. I have to sit here and I have to take this. I know one of my weird beliefs was that I in some ways had like that I somehow I was the guy that had to handle it all. And so because of that, like there was like entitlement, or there was like, I could never ask for help because I had to handle it all. Like what a horrible like message to take out. You know, if somebody says, man, Pat, you really got your act together. You've really been able to handle a lot of things. That's a compliment, but nowhere in that does it say, well, then, which of course means that you can never ask for help and you have to handle everything. And what your needs are in the moment are not important. That's a message that I took.
Yeah.
And so that contributed, deeper to my lack of self-worth.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so you had low self-worth, but high self-confidence. I had high self-worth, but low self-confidence. We're going to get these mixed up at some point in this episode. So maybe let's talk about our own individual, like how these manifested, like my self-worth versus my lack of self-confidence, and kind of how those show up a little bit. And then we can kind of talk a little bit more about, okay, if you struggle with either one of these, how do we kind of work through them? Yeah. So self-worth, as I sort of mentioned earlier, kind of the identity level of your value and your worth, and what like it is important that, I am valued and respected, right? That's sort of like, I guess if you wanted to wrap it into a core part of it. And so that kind of belief that I was valuable and deserved a certain level of treatment is partially what I think allowed me to set really clear boundaries with you and high expectations. So that I think was a benefit there. Helped me, I think, in my clarity of thought around the outcome. You and I were talking about this earlier. I was thinking through the patience that it took. And I am not a patient person, so I was kind of making that comment to you. I was like, I look back and I had this awareness, probably because practitioners that I was working with probably communicated this to me in some way or another, or in various ways, or multiple times, maybe, I don't know. But I had the realization and the information handed to me or whatever, that I shouldn't be making certain decisions in the moment, in the time period that we were navigating all this hard stuff, with all of the emotions that I was feeling then. And I had this idea in my head that I needed to give myself enough time and wait through some of the really hard stuff before I didn't ever want to feel any pressure about, making decisions or anything either. But one way or another, it was just this awareness I needed to be patient through the process. If there was any potential, like that reconciliation was on the table, there was a level to which I was going to have to force myself to be patient through the process. Not that I was, we've talked about, I was very active in going to my own, doing my own work, making sure you were connected to your own resources, creating safety, all of these things. But then I also, every betrayed partner ever is going to want, okay, I've got my therapist, you have your therapist, are we better tomorrow? And the fact that we're not, and that it takes, and that the healing process for individually and then the reconciliation process together takes so much time is really hard. And there's these moments where it's like, you're just really struggling through that. And so I think there was this awareness that I had to be patient through the process. And it kind of allowed me to navigate some of those hard times a little bit, to kind of push through that, just going, like one of the examples that I mentioned to you earlier was like the ring. I still have the ring. I stopped wearing it immediately, but I never like threw it out. I never sold it. I never, I didn't make that decision, a couple months in. I didn't make a decision about reconciliation. It was such a gradual thing. I don't know if there was like a point in time that I made that decision, but I was giving myself like a year at least, right? There were just all these things that I sort of was like, this is really hard. I know I need to wait through it. I'm not going to base it on this moment, I guess, in time and how I was feeling, if that makes sense. Yep. But yeah, it helped me with clarity, I think, a vision of where we wanted to go. It helped me in that aspect in terms of knowing who I am, knowing what I wanted and what I felt like I deserved in a relationship. And it's not I. It's what I think women deserve in relationships. It's what I think humans deserve in relationships. And so knowing that, I think, helped me with the clarity and the vision, because it's not really about me. It's what I think health is. I guess that's a better way to put it. I knew what I believed was healthy, and I think humans deserve healthy. Right. And so that's kind of what I was holding to. Also, if you look at my first divorce, I think having that deep sense of self-worth, I think, is part of what allowed me to move through with my divorce. So, it kind of works on both directions. It helps you make those decisions that are right for you because you know who you are and you're not really doubting that. I think that's maybe part of it. It's like you're not doubting yourself. Sometimes individuals can get really, who am I? What do I deserve? What part of me is mixed up in this, or am I at fault? And all these sorts of things. As
you're saying that, and for those who are listening, as you were asking, you're like, what do I deserve? What is this? Like when you have low self-worth, you almost don't know how to ask those questions. Yeah. It's not like you're like, am I treating myself? And the situation around me holds my worth up to be the best. Like you're just, it's so automatic. And you default to the behaviors that engage a lack of self-worth. It's almost subtle, and sometimes there's a major exercise or like discovery that forces you into the process of rebuilding your self-worth, or maybe there's somebody that comes along in your life that really starts to show you what your self-worth is, and so because it's just so subtle, it's the frog in boiling water or whatever that is. Like you've just been in that boiling water of a lack of self-worth for as long as you can remember, because those opinions have been formed by trauma or whatever deep wounds that are residing in you.
Yeah, for sure. I think example of the maybe mix between self-worth versus self-confidence for me too is the situation where I with my ex pastor at that church where I had all the church trauma during my divorce, because self-worth allowed me to essentially challenge quote unquote authority. I put that in quotes because it's not actual authority over me, but it's perceived authority and an authority figure, so to speak. And I knew who I was and what was right. And I was not going to be bullied in that situation. And I didn't allow myself to be bullied in that situation. But boy, was that, it traumatized me for a long time. And I think that goes into the self-confidence piece where it's like, I know who I am, so I'm not going to let XYZ happen. But I'm so insecure that this situation brought a lot of insecurities up and made me feel horrible for a long time. And it really brought a lot of negative stuff up in the realm of self-confidence. And so I think those two things can be integrally linked in some situations. I just think that's a particular example of it where it really wounded me deeply. And the self-confidence piece of it is, again, I think a little more external in how people perceive you, not really liking conflict, not feeling really confident in navigating those types of situations. But the self-worth piece was enough and strong enough there to say, okay, but I'm not going to veer. I'm not going to change direction because this is uncomfortable. But because it was so uncomfortable, it ended up being really traumatizing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, moving on. So moving into the self-confidence piece where I struggle a little bit more, I ruminate a lot. I think about conversations, whether it be with friends or clients or any of these things. I want to hold myself to such a high standard. I basically want to hold myself to perfection, which is unreasonable. So if I ever think that, I could have been more empathetic here, or I could have been more creative here, I could have been, I didn't think about that in the moment. I should have said X, Y, Z, or I said this too loosely. And should I never have said that? Did it does somebody think I'm too much, or did that come across the wrong way, or did they interpret it the wrong way? And one of the things that I've learned and that, I teach my clients and everything is that you can only be responsible for yourself and showing up with integrity and doing your best. You cannot be responsible for the thoughts that other people think or the filter that they view the world through. So you can't be responsible for how they respond to you. That's not your job. Now, it's much easier said than done. And it's a thing that we have to practice and remind ourselves, because if you do struggle with self-confidence, that's going to be hard to accept, right? That I could show up perfectly and they could interpret it a different way? Yes, because their filter might be set through their life experiences, right? And you could show up with all the empathy and kindness in the world and say something that you didn't know there was, through their filter, maybe they interpreted a different way. Right. So that is something I think with the self-confidence piece that I definitely struggle with is I really want to hold myself up to a certain standard, and I want to be everything to everyone, and I want to be everybody's best friend, and I want to be like the best coach in the whole world, and I want to be the best practitioner in the whole world, and I want to help everybody that I work with, and I want to be, I just want to like do the right thing all the time, and I want to do the perfect thing, and and I can't always do that, not for lack of trying, obviously.
Yeah.
But because of that, I will often ruminate a lot, and I'll overthink things, and I'll run things over in my mind and go, what could I have done differently? What could I have done differently? So I think that's an area where that can really lead to a lot of discomfort and struggle. And
there's some facets of self-help out there that can, if not read in the right way, can send a differing message. So I'll use the example of one of the books that I love, and that book is Extreme Ownership. And so that book talks about like, hey, if you've got some issues in the workplace or whatever that is, or if a plan that you have created has not gone well, you've got to really look internally. And the message is really, really positive because it's trying to teach you how to, hey, make sure you do everything you humanly can in a situation, right? There's always more you can do to make a situation better. But it never says in there that, and I'm kind of a disciple of the extreme ownership thing, right? But it never says in there that you're responsible for everybody's reactions and behaviors, right? And so I know when I started running men's groups, one of the challenges that I had to overcome, one of the situations of growth was I then took on everyone's ability to get into sobriety and recovery. And so like, if you think of that's humanly impossible. Like I can run the best group in the history of the planet, and there's going to be some guys that just won't get into sobriety and recovery. And it's because it's on them. And so, the extreme ownership book would say, well, they have to own their part as far as getting that done.
Right. And so like, I think the thing there is that everyone has their role, and the role as a coach and a mentor is to show the way, give them the resources, give them the tools. And you could argue that's when they know what they are, that's what the betrayed partner can do as well, is go, and these are my boundaries and expectations and things like that. And then it's the job of the individual. What do I do with that? Do they take, to your point, ownership of that? And what's their decision? And you can be the most perfect spouse, you can be the most perfect coach, and they do nothing with it, and that is not on you.
That's right.
You couldn't have loved harder, you couldn't have tried harder.
Yeah. But it's
hard. Yeah, when you're in these positions trying to help people, you're like, I want to help you. Like, should I have worded it differently? Was there a different analogy that would have like resonated with them?
Yeah, my reaction to those situations has very much changed over the last 4 years. I used to really, and there are times though when I'll go, well, do I need to find a different way to interact with that person, which I think is very healthy.
For sure.
Like, is there something that I should do, maybe from a phone call perspective? But I always remind myself in the recovery side, is like, I can't want recovery more than that person. Right. I can't do I did a lot of individual thought, quiet work.
Self-reflection, yourself.
You can't do that for people. They have to do that. And so I've had to learn that I think that's been it's been a point of pride that I've had to work through, on my own recovery journey,
like if you're good enough, everybody will get better.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, I'll be able to bring everybody along, and we'll have this, I'll keep statistics on it as opposed to, hey, show up in the world as a healing light, and then people will gravitate toward them.
I think the best example we have of that is Jesus, right? Like literally perfect, and people still hated him.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's hard because there is a balance between the self-reflection piece of continuing to grow, of, I want to make sure that if I can word something differently, if there's a way to communicate something effectively to someone, that we learn that we continue to practice that we do think about our interactions with people and go, how can I be better the next time? So there is a balance between that and then not taking responsibility for the other person and how they interpret. The idea when you have a safe relationship, which a marriage should be a safe relationship, and a coaching relationship or a mentor relationship should be a safe relationship. And the idea with safe relationships is that you both give each other the benefit of the doubt, and that if there's a confusion point, that someone gently brings it up so that there can be clarification, right? And that's the ideal, right? Mm-hmm. And if we kind of all knew that we were on that same page, we might be able to take a breath a little bit and go, okay, well, I know if there's a problem, they'll bring it up to me. But that's not always what happens. And so then we're sort of left to, okay, let me overthink this a little bit. Yeah. So self-confidence, I think, can manifest in a lot of ways like that. And I think sometimes it makes you feel very insecure and unsafe. So, I mean, there's been a lot of situations where I'm in like a group situation and it's like I don't know how to interact like a normal human being. I do my best, but then I overthink like how I participate in the conversation. I overthink how it's going to be interpreted. I'm like, am I being weird? Like there's just a lot of like over assessment, unless it's with someone or people, an individual or a group of people that I just feel incredibly comfortable with for whatever reason. But that's so rare. I have so few people in my life that I wouldn't be in that headspace for. So that's, I think, one of the negative ways that manifests for sure. Just wondering how you're viewed or how it's coming across, you know? Imposter syndrome is another way that lack of self-confidence, and that's sort of what you and I were just talking about, right? Like, am I doing that? Am I qualified for this? Like, am I really helping people? And then you get these wonderful, you know, you have these people that have gotten into sobriety and their lives have changed and everything is great. And they, you know, encourage you about how you lead these groups and how you've helped them. And then I'll have clients come in and say, you know, similar things. Okay, we're doing okay. It's really okay. But it's hard. It is hard. And I think there's any time that you want to be somebody that shows up in the world helping others or doing something good, or you have a talent or a skill or anything like that you want to be really good at, you're going at some point, most people are going to have imposter syndrome and be like, should I be doing this? Is there somebody that's better at this? You know? Mm-hmm.
I think about this, you know, one of the things that when I showed up to Conquer for the first time, I always talk about, hey, I can do this because it's a process. So I had a lot of self-confidence in my ability to navigate a process through, you know, but early on, like as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, that, you know, but I also felt like, you know, you should move on. And we talked a little bit about this last night. Like I never fully just flat out said, you should move on. Like let's split up.
Well, you did sort of in the very, very, very beginning where you were sort of like always giving me the option. And I was like, cut it out. You're not allowed to.
Yeah. But it's
I was like, you can't cheat on me and then leave me too.
You know,
Stop talking about it.
But I think I was also worried about myself because part of that was I'm a very decisive person. So I was very concerned that I was just going to be like, nope, this is what's happening. And it would have been born out of my low self-worth, right?
Yeah, so you had patience too in a way. But in
a crazy thing, but also like high self-confidence and like, oh, I've already been through a divorce. I'll get through this one too. You know, like it's a really weird thing. But I think, you know, like.
Well, actually what you just said is important. So pause there real quick. Because pushing me away would come from a lack of self-worth.
Right.
Knowing that you'd be fine navigating a divorce came from high self-confidence.
Right.
Yeah. So just, same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, so it's interesting because once I figured out very quickly that there was a process for this, I worked the process, right? And I have a lot of confidence because I've always worked processes my entire life. Anytime I've been in, like when I ran a plant and I had to get a rescue because the plant wasn't doing very well, they showed up with a very clear process and I worked that process. When we decided to go public and I started to advertise that I'm running these programs, that was hard, right? Because I was born out of a lack of self-worth. And I was really nervous to stand up and talk about those things because I was like, well, people are going to see me for what I really am.
Identity
and that's
level,
nasty. You know what I mean? It's like
But that's important too, because what you've also learned over the past several years is that behavior was not part of your identity.
Right.
So over time, you've been able to shift that, which I think has been part of what has healed your self-worth.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's so much easier to stand up there now and talk about it because I know the process that I've been through. And I think you led with this, and I firmly believe that everybody deserves to go through a process where they can heal their wounds.
We want that for everybody.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have to be a sex addict, but man, the ability to, and I think I was listening to a podcast this morning where somebody was like, yeah, me and my husband, we go to marriage therapy, and my parents are always like, is there anything wrong? They're like, no, we're just working on our marriage. We want to make it better because they know now that like working on things, everybody deserves to be in the healthiest state that they can be.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The healthiest state we can be. I love that. Yeah, so let's talk about yours now. So you have high self-confidence. So that has allowed you, we've sort of mentioned this, it allows you to feel really safe in friendships and social interactions.
Right. Yeah.
So that's something like, I think we differ like so dramatically in that area. Like there's a lot of areas where I just don't feel like super safe and secure, and socially you feel super safe and secure.
Well, it's interesting. I think about this. I've always been well liked, but I do remember there were brief times throughout my life where human beings have taught me that, hey, we still really, really like you. Like there was a brief period of time in high school where like high school then on a Friday and I was never invited to go anywhere. Right. Aww. And I'd be like, oh. But then all of a sudden it shifted. Right. Yeah. And it was just because people are doing their own thing and all of a sudden they invite you. Right. Same thing at West Point. I was like, well, and all of a sudden it just, you find your group of friends. And I remember we used to say the same thing about Keegan. He's going to find his group. And it's happened. And so now he's, they ask him to go places. He was talking to us today. He's going to be somewhere. He's like, yeah, I've got a whole bunch of friends that are going to be there. And so but I guess my point to that is human beings come through for you. They, not only do they wound you, but they also come through for you. And so I've learned through the years that from a friendship standpoint that I'm a good friend and that people like hanging out with me and that sort of thing, but which is crazy because, my habit was very secret and so that kept it secret, right? Well, what if these people learned what I was doing?
Right.
Then, they wouldn't want to be part of my friendship anymore.
You haven't lost any friends so far?
Nope,
not really.
Not at all.
It gave you your self-confidence, I think gave you confidence in your abilities to get things done, which you mentioned earlier with like, okay, there's a process. I know I can do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it also just gave you confidence that you could overcome something. So your ability, like you knew if there was a way that you had an ability to get sober.
Right.
Part of what you had struggled with before discovery was just trying to do it by yourself and just not having any sort of clear path towards that.
Right.
Once you had a path, I think your self-confidence was like, I can do this.
Well, and what discovery did was it took away the secrecy of it. So I think, had I found a process early on, like I often think about that. I'm like, well, if I discovered this process, yet it had still stayed secret, like it like what would have happened? I don't know. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I don't know what that path would have been, but certainly the sharp breaking of my secrecy, right, coupled with the program was monumental to my healing.
My guess would be that you may have been able to achieve some level of sobriety, but had the secrecy, like had I never found out and it stayed a level apart, just in the dark, that you never would have been able to get anywhere close to the level of recovery that you're in.
Yeah.
That'd be my guess. Just because it's like honesty and this no secrets is like required to get to that level of breaking through the shame and all the things that kind of keep you stuck in that. Yeah.
Well, without a doubt. I mean, knowing, you being able to love me and look at me and say that you love me while also knowing everything about me. That is it's mind-blowing, but it's also incredibly healing, right? Because you're like, well, why would you love me? And you're like, well, don't worry about that. I do. And so, then, when you start talking about self-worth, you're like, but I don't love me.
There you go.
And you're like, but I love you. And I go, well, how do I heal that? How do I reconcile that? And that becomes part of the journey.
Yeah. Your self-worth. So you just flipped into that. My little note
You're welcome.
here. My little note here says you felt like poo.
I did feel like poo. Yeah.
Yeah. So so your self-worth was like really low. You just basically walked right into that saying, it's going to be hard for you to receive love from others. Actually a really good point, because that will happen with addicts and with betrayed partners. It can again, this is all just human stuff. We're just putting it in the context of betrayal and addiction. But if you have a hard time receiving love and sitting there and going, I'm like, this person wants to send me love. This is like, some of what I'll kind of hear is like that manifests as like, I'm a burden. So even if somebody's loving me, well, I can't really, like, it makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
Because like, well, I really don't deserve that. Right. As opposed to being able to just sit there and receive it and feel good about it and feel loved through it. So that's, if, you know, we're not, the idea of sharing like how this is manifesting in our lives isn't to go, Patrick, Kylene. It's because we want to kind of pull out the specific pieces, examples in various ways that may relate to you. So if you're somebody that goes, do I have trouble receiving love? Okay, so like, when was the last time somebody, it might be kind of hard. Sit down and kind of think through, when was the last time somebody offered that to you? And it might be a hard thing to answer if you're someone that doesn't receive it. If you sort of subconsciously or energetically reject it a little bit because there's a self-worth thing. And that's what I would say is, I think if you struggle with that, it probably is at a core wound level of, I'm not valuable enough for somebody wanting to take the time and the energy to go out of their way for me here, or to help me here, or to demonstrate their love here, or to get uncomfortable to help me be comfortable. I'm not worth that. But on the flip side, I'm probably the same person that'll go do that for somebody else.
That's right. Yeah.
One of your core beliefs was I was unlovable.
Right.
You, Patrick, were unlovable.
Yeah, personally. Yep.
Okay. So let's get to, all right, we've kind of thoroughly itemized the opposites of the strengths and the weaknesses between the two, and like how they've manifested in our lives. So what do we do about it? So you worked on it through therapy. You addressed the wounds that created the belief that you were unlovable. So you did that very specifically and intentionally. And you began to practice vulnerability. And, you know, you were mentioning kind of with your friends earlier. So you began to practice vulnerability and then observing that you were still loved.
Right.
So I think you did both. It was like real world application. And then also, you know, working with your therapist to actually like, let's figure out the internal messaging that I'm communicating to myself and let's work on changing that. And so you did sort of both.
Right.
I think my self-confidence improved as my healing has. So as I continued to go through betrayal recovery and doing all the deep inner work myself, but then, so it was basically the same answer. I did therapy. I did inner work. I was looking at my belief systems and how I viewed my, you know, the limiting beliefs I may have that are impacting my life, working through those things, but also then external practicality. We've talked about music and how I started going back to voice lessons and building my self-confidence up there. And then I did the King and I, and that really built my self-confidence up there. And then I really reclaimed a lot of my confidence and my voice by doing a concert a couple months ago. And that was just, I planned it, I sang it, I did it with several other people. And so that just really, really helped me sort of like break through that wall. And so that was kind of a practical, step-by-step practicing of, you know, improving in that area that I was struggling with as well. That really helped. So I would say, if you are listening to this and you're really identifying with, okay, I think maybe I have low self-worth at that identity level. I struggle with feeling valuable, like I deserve things. What do we do about it? We want to begin to identify your core values. So what is it that you believe in? What is the moral compass that guides your life? What is it that makes you who you are? Just kind of really getting into what system, what value system is it that's going to, you know, sort of run your life and help you make decisions. And then another way, thing that can be really helpful is think of how you view others and begin to practice applying the same level of grace, compassion, and rights to yourself that you would automatically give to them. So if you view your daughter, your sister, your mother, your cousin, your best friend in your situation very, very differently than you would view yourself. That's a really good exercise that completely changes the way we think about things, to think, okay, I'm struggling here, or I have an internal conflict about this. Let me put the exact situation on someone I really care about, view it from that perspective. And suddenly I would want to go hug them, protect them, love them, tell them, let me care for you. Let me love you. Let me protect you. Let me help you. Whatever it is to help them in whatever situation they're struggling with. So anything that you would naturally give to that person, you want to turn around and practice offering that to yourself. Right. That level of care, compassion, grace, gentleness, forgiveness, whatever it is, protection. And so that can really help, I think, change our perspective. But we do have to, again, kind of the examples that you and I gave, there is really deep internal work that we do with our practitioners of on a subconscious level of processing these things. And then there's practical steps of like, okay, well, let me maybe practice some of this. And how do I take baby steps towards that?
Right.
So then if someone is, same thing, struggling with self-confidence, then we're going to want to identify small, safe ways that we can begin building it up. So I gave the example of music. I started by just going back to lessons. Yeah. I didn't start by scheduling a concert, and inviting people to listen to me sing. I went back to my lesson, and I felt nervous the first couple weeks singing in front of a teacher that had already heard me sing years ago, So it was a slow process. And we've talked about that with intimacy, right? Like what's the lowest rung of intimacy that feels uncomfortable? Is it holding hands? Is it cuddling on the couch? Is it eye gazing? Is it sitting there and receiving compliments, verbal compliments from your partner? Like what is the most safe but still uncomfortable thing that you can do? And so if you're struggling with self-confidence, it's the same thing. Like, can I dip my toes into a little bit larger social setting? Can I practice having this conversation? Can I, what is it that we can begin to do? Whatever your situation is, rewind it to the lowest rung, the easiest, safest thing that maybe still feels a little bit uncomfortable, and then get comfortable with that.
As you're talking about self-confidence and self-worth, there's certainly the difference behind it. But, one of the ways there's a similar path between growing in both of those. So, self-worth, you get a practitioner or a process, you go through some deep process where you're, healing your wounds and you're limiting self-beliefs and all these different things. Same thing in self-confidence. That's like you were talking about singing again. Well, you went back to your teacher, right? So your teacher is helping you regain self-confidence. There's that organization out there called Toastmasters, which teaches people how to do public speaking, and it's supported, and you have people in there, and they're your cohort, and they're cheering you on, and all these different things. And so, like, it's really interesting. I think about, once again, like having, I post knee surgery, I go see a physical therapist, and she goes, I need you to like jump up onto this thing. I'm like, well, I don't want to jump on the thing. I'm scared that my knee's going to give way. And she's like, no, you can do this. And so there's a good example where I'm building my self-confidence in my repaired knee, and she's helping me gain that self-confidence. And
that's a really good example of sometimes our confidence and those brain patterns can be established when somebody else preemptively has confidence in us before we do.
Right. Yeah.
And there's been many times in my life where that has been the case as well, where it's like, oh, I don't know. And they're like, you can do it.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, I'll try. And then because someone else paved the way for you and said, I believe that you're capable.
Yeah, they spoke belief into you.
Yeah. I believe that you're capable of this, which, just want to take this back into addiction and betrayal. That's what boundaries are for a betrayed partner. Another way of thinking those is telling your husband who's cheated on you or who's struggling with this addiction, I believe that you're capable of more, and holding the self-worth and the value in yourself to go, this is what I deserve, and I believe that you're capable of more. And that's what a boundary is really asking for.
Right. Well, and that's what you did with me. I always say this, like you held the belief in me when I couldn't. And so as we moved through recovery, you kept saying, I believe that you can be an amazing husband, an amazing father, an amazing human being. You can be an amazing lover. I mean, like you go through the list, right? And so, but it was very uncomfortable for me because my sense of self-worth in all of those situations was shattered. And so you through this process, you kept holding that up. And then at such time, I was able to do the same for you, through this process in some
because
various
my
moments.
self-confidence was hit.
Right. Yeah.
Through your behavior.
Right.
And so you helped me rebuild that as well. And I was very engaged in healing it myself. But then because we stayed together, you were part of healing that too.
Right.
So we kind of had to do that in different ways for each other for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to summarize sort of all of it, you can probably tell and hear from our personal experience and then from breaking them up a little bit that I feel like the healing process for everything is almost exactly the same. No matter what you're struggling with, if you want to like zoom out and just bullet point it for everything is like identifying the emotions associated, identify the wounds underneath that created the emotions and the patterns, and then working with someone who can help you navigate, begin to process it in a healthy way. We like to use the term subconscious. That's where these things are stored. So like some modality, I love doing subconscious work with my clients. It's like, that's where the magic really happens.
Yeah.
Now, we want to create stability, safety and stability first. In your environment and in your life. We don't want to jump into the subconscious work day one, but when you are ready and when things are sort of stabilized and then you're kind of getting stuck moving forward, that ends up being a really great place to do that. And so it's identifying the emotions, identifying the wounds, working with someone that can help you navigate, begin processing it, and it begins to shift our thinking at that core level. So when you're thinking about self-worth, well, how can I change something that has to do with being, an identity, and like it's deep at that core wound level? That's how it's in the subconscious. It's all stored in the subconscious, and that comes from previous experiences that we've had in life. So when we can work in that level and then begin practicing reiterating that in our day-to-day life, that's when it begins to shift, and it shifts our thinking and our patterns. And so then we can change our patterns to the ones we want and to the identity we want, instead of the ones we are simply familiar and comfortable with. And so ultimately, that's the deeper work. When we say inner work, when we say deeper work, that's what we're talking about. And that's, I think, where all the magic happens.
Absolutely.
Anything else about self-confidence versus self-worth?
No.
All right, great job. Well, please remember that every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. Make that choice today, and we will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.